Hamas declares war on Christmas and on Christians, and more on how that whole settler violence slander is a setup for an Israeli defeat in the war. Coming up on In Focus. Well, I'm recording on December 24th, so Merry Christmas to all of you who are Christians who are celebrating your holy day today. I hope you enjoy it with your family and friends and have an important and meaningful holiday. I want to talk to you a little bit now about how Hamas, which is fighting Israel here in the Holy Land, is waging war on Christmas around the world and also here at home. So first of all, around the world, I'm just going to give you videos right now you can see of Hamas supporters in New York, in Melbourne, in Ottawa, Canada, Seattle,
Palestine will be free.
Washington, D.C., Detroit, Michigan, and on and on and on. And cities all over the Western world are upsetting Christmas celebrations in their cities and making it all but impossible for people to enjoy themselves, or in recent weeks when they were lighting Christmas trees, when they were going Christmas shopping. And now I think December 22nd, Hamas supporters in New York City put out an ad openly saying, "We're going to stop traffic in major traffic arteries, the George Washington Bridge, I-95, to stop New Yorkers from celebrating Christmas with their families." So here they are saying, we are going to upset the Christmas holiday for Christians all over the world, and we're doing it in the name of Palestine from the river to the sea. So here we are fighting for the annihilation of the Jewish people and the Jewish state, and you might call them collateral damage in our war against the Jews are going to be the Christians, whose holiest day of the year we are going to upset, and we're going to make everybody miserable and sad. I think one of the more effective videos that I've seen recently is one from Ohio, Canada. Ohio, Canada, from Ottawa, Canada, the capital of Canada, where they start crowding around Santa Claus and scaring all the little kids who wanted to sit on Santa Claus's lap at the shopping centers. I think it's important, obviously, if you want to protest a war thousands of miles away, to frighten small children when they're trying to celebrate their holiday by engaging in some of the traditional activities that preceded, including sitting on Santa's lap at shopping malls. So that's what they were doing, and it's not surprising because Hamas and Islamists generally, but Hamas, Palestinian Authority, the Palestinians have been waging a war on Christians for many, many, many years. Bethlehem, the site of Jesus' birth, they canceled Christmas celebrations this year out of solidarity with the jihadists in Gaza, who have decimated the Christian population of Gaza since they took over in 2007. And by the way, it had already been decimated by Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Authority since the Palestinian Authority was established in 1994 in Gaza Strip. So, and if we just take Bethlehem as a case study, we can see that when Israel was established in 1948, 90% of the population of Bethlehem was Christian. When Israel took over from Jordan, and I don't remember what it was in 1967, but when Israel transferred control over Bethlehem to the Palestinian Authority, to the PLO in 1996, Bethlehem was 60% Christian, and a lot of this had to do with the fact that Muslims have much higher birth rates than Christians do. It has a lot to do with the fact that Christians were already beginning to emigrate out of Bethlehem under the Jordanian occupation from 1949 to 1967. All the same, it was at 60% in 1990. In 1995, Israel transferred. In 1996, Israel transferred it to Yasser Arafat. And today it stands at around 20%. And Christians are repressed. They've been living under constant repression, humiliation, and assault. And so this comes about in a lot of ways, or it's expressed in a lot of ways. One is that they suffer from being sworn at in the streets. Their houses, their businesses are extorted away from them. They're forced to sell, so that when the Palestinian Authority came in 1996, the vast majorities of the stores around Manger Square were owned by Christians, and today they're almost all owned by Muslims. And the vast majority of the Christians who owned these stores on Manger Square are now living in Latin America. So you've had a massive amount of immigration of Christians from Bethlehem, from the town of Bethlehem and the surrounding villages of Beit Sahur and Beit Jala to Latin America, particularly Chile, since 1996. And in fact, there have been claims that there are more Palestinian Christians from the Bethlehem area in Chile than there are in Bethlehem today. So, I mean, and that's one of the reasons, by the way, that Chile has become so incredibly hostile to Israel in recent years, is because they've had a burgeoning Palestinian community in in Chile. So, first of all, you have immigration, you have humiliation, you have extortion of land, you have forced marriages of Christian girls to Muslim men. So the Christians are living in fear in Bethlehem, but they're always blaming the Jews. And what's interesting here is that you see a pattern of Christian behavior. So, for instance, in 1967, after Israel took control over Judea and Samaria in the Six-Day War, including Bethlehem, the heads of the town, the mayor of the town, Elias Fudge, and others came to Israel and asked to be annexed into the Jewish state along with eastern Jerusalem, and Israel refused. And then in 1995, when Israel was signing the agreement with the PLO to expand the Palestinian Authority, which had been formed the previous year in Jericho and Gaza, to the rest of the towns and the villages of Judea and Samaria, Elias Fudge came to Yitzhak Rabin, the prime minister. He was the mayor of Bethlehem, came to Yitzhak Rabin, and he asked that Bethlehem be left outside of the Palestinian Authority and that Israel would continue to administer it under the civil administration, that it would be part of so-called Area C, which is controlled by Israel, both from a civil affairs perspective and also from a military affairs perspective. And Rabin said, look, give me a public request, put it in writing and publish that in writing so that I have a formal request from the city of Bethlehem not to be included in the Palestinian Authority. And the mayor refused because he was afraid of being assassinated, rightly so. And so he wouldn't put it in writing, and Bethlehem was included in the Palestinian Authority. In 2003, when Israel was building the security fence to protect Jerusalem and its major population centers from Palestinian terrorists, suicide bombers, etc., the route for the security fence in Bethlehem had initially placed all of the church property on the Palestinian side of the security fence. And the church elders came to Israel and they asked the Sharon government at the time to please put the church property on the Israeli side of the security fence. And Israel reconsidered, and they redrew the security fence so that the majority of church property in Bethlehem is located on the Israeli side of the security fence in order to protect it. So this is what the Christians in Bethlehem are constantly doing when it comes to nuts and bolts. They ask Israel for protection, but when it comes to propaganda, they immediately join the side of the Muslims and they castigate Israel and they join in the delegitimization of Israel. You have groups like Sabil, which acts as a front organization for Palestinian terrorist groups. As in the name of the church, they do things like Christ at the checkpoint, where they say if Jesus was alive today, then he would be a Palestinian and he would be stuck by Israeli occupation forces at the roadblocks, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, if Jesus was born today, he wouldn't be living in Bethlehem because Jews aren't even allowed to enter Bethlehem, and Jesus was Jewish. He would probably be living in my community of Efrat, which is adjacent to Bethlehem, It's the birthplace of King David. But there are no Jews in Bethlehem, and therefore Jesus would not have been born in Bethlehem. He would have been born somewhere else. In fact, the only city in the area, major Christian city in the Holy Land, except for Jerusalem, but that you're having Christmas celebrations this year is Nazareth, which is inside of Israel proper. And inside of Israel, the Christian population, as opposed to within the Palestinian Authority, including Gaza, is growing. It's growing all the time because Israel enables freedom of worship, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of everything, protects the civil rights of all of its citizens, including its Christian citizens, which is why you've seen increased participation of Christian Israelis over the past several years in the IDF and integration into Israeli society. So because the Christians recognized, particularly after the Arab Spring, that, Israel was the safest port in the storm, and they began increasingly to embrace their Israeli identity as opposed to their Arab identity. Many of them even said they didn't want to be called Arabs on their identity card, but rather be called Aramaic, and started sending their children to Hebrew language schools because it was safer for them and they had a better chance of getting ahead. So you have the Christian community in Israel growing, you have the Christian community in the Palestinian Authority areas disappearing. And it's not just in Bethlehem. Today, overall, there are only 50,000 Christians living in the Palestinian Authority-ruled areas. There are almost none in Gaza. Again, that community has been completely decimated in the past decade and a half of Hamas rule. And they now comprise 1 to 2% of Judea and Samaria. And they used to be 11, 12% overall. And now, so they've been literally decimated. So you look at this, you look at the war on Christmas that we're seeing all over the West today by Hamas's jihadist supporters in the major cities and towns of America, Canada, Australia, England, and other places. And you realize that this is a pattern. And the pattern follows the slogan of jihad, which is first we come for the Saturday people, that is the Jews, and next we go to the Sunday people. And we see in Europe, it's really, they do both, right? I mean, they go after Christians. They beheaded a priest in a church a few years ago in northern France. The Cathedral of Notre Dame was destroyed in an electrical fire in November of 2019. Very much, by the way, as another monastery in Bethlehem was destroyed in September of 2015. It was destroyed. The Palestinian Authority said it was an electrical fire, but according to the Archbishop his name is Musa Haj, 2 days before that, before the monastery was burned to the ground in September of 2015, it was burgled by Muslims who stole a lot of the precious items that were located there, and then 2 days later, it was burned to the ground, and the Palestinian Authority, as it always did, said, nothing to see here, everything was fine, just as they did in France. And so this is a trend, and obviously it raises the issue of why is it then that the Pope is claiming that Israel's attacks in Gaza that killed apparently a few days ago some women in southern Gaza was a terrorist attack? Why is the Pope accusing Israel of state terrorism when he knows precisely who it is that Israel's fighting? And part of the answer is simply fear. You have a lot of Christians who are living in Muslim majority lands, not that many actually, because since 9/11 in particular, the Christian communities of most Muslim states have been subjected to massive persecution, and in some cases, as in Iraq, for instance, annihilation. All the same, rather than stand with Israel, you have leaders of the Catholic Church and of other churches around the world joining the Islamists in attacking Israel and of accusing Israel of being responsible for the jihad that's being carried out against its people, even though, again, you see that the same jihad is being carried out by Hamas's supporters and representatives throughout the Western world. And that really brings us to one of the second subject that I wanted to talk to you about, which is the blood libel against the Jews of Judea and Samaria. And here, I mean, it's a little bit different, but it's related because it's all about whitewashing what's happening, what the Palestinian Authority is doing, what the Palestinian people are doing, what the people who call themselves Palestinians who live in Gaza, who live in Judea and Samaria, who, as we've shown repeatedly on this show, overwhelmingly support the slaughter, the rape, the kidnapping, the mutilation of the Jews in southern Israel on October 7th. What are they doing, and what are they claiming that the Jews are doing against them in order to justify their actions, justify their genocide? So the main slander that we've really been hearing, although we've heard so much, like what the Pope said about the IDF, but we've heard so many slanders, so many libels of Israel in the last couple of months all over the Western world that it's hard to keep track. But one of the main sort of leitmotifs of the assaults is this allegation of settler violence. This is a major claim by the Biden administration in particular, but not only, where they seek apparently to forge some sort of a moral equivalence between Israel and Hamas by targeting Israeli Jews who live in Judea and Samaria and accusing them of being violent settlers and carrying out settler violence. Settler violence, not normal violence, but it's settler violence. It's like some sort of a new pejorative that's meant specifically to castigate Jews in Israel, and particularly those who live in Judea and Samaria. So I just want to give you a sense. We've spoken about this in the past and how these blood libels are forged by anarchists who work with Palestinian terrorists in Judea and Samaria, who then the anarchists talk to their cohorts in these NGOs in America. They spread these blood libels against Israeli Jews that are picked up by these fake human rights organizations in the United States that are aligned with the Biden administration, particularly people in the State Department. So it goes from anarchists attacking Israeli soldiers on the ground here to their fellow travelers in the United States, to the Democratic Party, which they're aligned with or part of in the United States, goes to the State Department, and it forms the basis of the State Department reports claiming that Israeli Jews are attacking Palestinians. So here I just want to give you a couple of data points. So the head of the Benjamin Regional Council, which is in central Judea and Samaria, these are tribal areas, right? The tribe of Judah, of Judah, is Judea, and Samaria is the northern kingdom that split off from the kingdom of Judah after the reign of King Solomon. So part of it is tribal areas, allotments under Joshua, and parts of it are the political changes inside of the ancient kingdoms of Israel. At any rate, Benjamin, of course, is the area that the tribe of Benjamin lived in. And so the Benjamin Regional Council head, Israel Gantz, was on Israeli television, and he explained that on the basis of his conversation that day, this was last week, with the police commissioner of the Samaria and Judea region of the police, that's responsible particularly for crime carried out by Jews in Judea and Samaria because of their jurisdiction. So he gave the following data this was from January 1st to, say, around December 14th. So he said, since January 1st of this year, there have been 5,600 Palestinian terror attacks against Jews in Judea and Samaria, and 60 altercations between Jewish residents of the areas and Palestinians since January. So 5,600 terrorist attacks and 60 fights between Israeli Jews and Palestinian Muslims throughout the entire year. Okay, but at the same time that this is happening on the ground, the State Department, the Biden administration just announced, the State Department, the Department of Treasury, that they're placing sanctions on Israeli Jews, residents of Judea and Samaria, or not, who are engaged in settler violence. But as Professor Eugene Kontorovich has pointed out, I think he wrote it in the New York Post last week, when you look at the language of the State Department statement, what they're actually saying is that they're going to be placing sanctions, including blocking entry to the United States of people accused of settler violence, not only against people who have allegations made against them, credible allegations, but really anybody that the State Department says opposes U.S. policy towards the Palestinians, which is the establishment of a Palestinian state. So presumably they can block anybody in Israel who opposes the Biden administration's pro-Palestinian positions under the headline of the anti-settler violence sanctions. The other thing, of course, is that there's no due process involved in any of these sanctions because, nobody, it's not specifically against people who have been convicted of any crime. It's just in general, people who are engaged in settler violence. Well, how do you determine who that is? However you want, because you're not using a legal standard for determining any of this. All the same, according to the police in Judea and Samaria, the number of altercations between Jews and Palestinians in the areas over the past year has dropped by 50% in 2023. And in fact, the last 2 months since the slaughter of October 7th have been the quietest that we've experienced in recent years. So the United States has this campaign where they're every day harping on settler violence, and they're not, and there is none. And in fact, there's almost no violence. Then my friend Elchanan Groner at Hakol Yehudi News Service, the Jewish Voice News Service, gave me some pretty amazing data as well today, which is that a colleague of his has undertaken an analysis of the UN's own data on settler violence, and he found that the UN data that claims that there's been a 200 to 300% increase in settler violence over the past few months, they count every entry of Jews to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, that is Judaism's most sacred spot, as settler violence. So Jews enter the Temple Mount generally on a routine basis twice a day. So you're talking about, like 730 acts of settler violence a day. This is in Jerusalem. You have border police operations against Palestinian terrorism in Jerusalem, in Israel's capital. All of the actual police operations, counterterror operations inside of Jerusalem are categorized by the United Nations as settler violence. The fights between Jews and Arabs in Jerusalem are all considered settler violence. Jewish visits, tourist visits to Jewish sites in Judea and Samaria, like the ancient capital of Samaria, which is now called Sebastia, that's called an act of settler violence. So you have a crazy definition of settler violence that includes things that are not settler violence, that are not violent. And then obviously any violent altercation between Palestinians and Jews is immediately classified not as a Palestinian terrorist attack where Jews fight back, but as settler violence. And so when you clean out all of the data for all of these things that are nonsense and there's just libels, you end up with something like 8 or 9 acts of violence per day under the UN's own data. So the UN's data, when you clean it out for all of the obviously absurd categories that they place inside of it, you're talking about 8 to 9 altercations per month. And when you're looking at, just think about Chicago, you're looking at, 500, 600 murders a year, right? And you're talking about 8 to 9 violent incidents that don't even end with murder or death in the vast majority of the cases. In fact, 0 settlers have been accused of killing Palestinians in the past year, just to give you a sense of it. You're talking about 8 to 9 violent whatever a month, according to the UN. And this is now being sanctioned by the U.S. State Department. To say that this is absurd is an understatement. It's not really, absurd. There's a reason for this, right? There's a method to this madness. It's not just for nothing that all of this is happening. And here I just want to give you a sense. I'm going to talk more about Egypt this week, and I'm hoping to write an article about it. So the Saudi paper talked about this Egyptian plan for hostages for terrorist swap. And let's not forget, so there are 127 Israeli hostages still being held by Hamas after 80 days, okay? Now, and they just said more of them were declared to have been murdered over the past several days. I think 4. One of them is an American, and 3 were in a hostage video last week, older men in their 70s with shaved heads and long Islamic beards, and they've been murdered. So we have 127 that are still considered to be alive. And the Egyptian plan has 3 stages. And again, just keep this in mind in sort of the settler violence thing. So the idea is this, that first, Israel is going to stop its offensive operations against Hamas, which is what they most want, right, for 2 to 3 weeks. And during the course of this very, very long ceasefire, Hamas is going to let out a total of 40 hostages, okay, so less than a third. And in exchange, during this incredibly long pause where they have every chance to regroup, and thanks to the United States, they're going to get as much resupply as they want. They're going to have like new air conditioning in the tunnel, all of the improvements that they can possibly want, parquet tiles, who knows what, all courtesy of U.S. taxpayers, thanks to the Biden administration's largesse. You're going to get all that during the ceasefire. And they're only going to have to give up less than a third of the hostages that they're holding. Okay, that's the first stage. And then say Israel gets to piddle a little bit, going back to work. During stage 2, what's stage 2? Stage 2 is Palestinian unity discussions. Unity discussions between the Palestinian Authority, that's Fatah, right? That's the Palestinian army that's supported by the United States government, that's trained by the United States government, that's funded by the United States government, and that's armed by the United States government. It's a modern military force that calls itself the police, but it's not. It's a U.S. Army. And so and they support terrorism. They support October 7th even more than the people of Gaza who are paying prices for it. But, like 86% of the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria support it, and another, 65% of Gazans, or whatever the latest data were. Most of them do. Anyway, so these people who all want to annihilate Israel, are training to annihilate Israel, are planning it. They are supposed to have unity talks with Hamas, and they're supposed to form a unity government. And then, after they form a unity government, Israel is supposed to enter a third phase with them, which is that now that we have a unified terrorist government against Israel, Israel is supposed to have new hostages for terrorist talks that are going to see the rest of the hostages, which include IDF soldiers, including female soldiers who are being held, released in exchange for Hamas murderers, including the murderers who raped our women and burned our children and our families and baked our babies alive and gassed our soldiers and our young people who sought shelter in bomb shelters, et cetera, on October 7th. They're supposed to be let out. And Israel is supposed to withdraw all of its forces from the Gaza Strip. So the Egyptian plan is actually for an Israeli defeat, a humiliating, complete, and total Israeli defeat at the hands of these jihadists. And that's Egypt, with whom we have a peace treaty. That's Egypt that receives $3 billion a year in U.S. military support from. That's Egypt that's considered the moderate, that we were also happy that the moderate president, Sisi, just won, with 99% of the vote, a third term in office last week. So that's Egypt, okay? So that's their ceasefire. But it's not just the Egyptian ceasefire. It's also the American ceasefire, because what are the Americans wanting? What is their end game that they keep demanding that Israel sign on to? What is it that the United States and Israel are about to have a blowout in relations about? The fact that what the United States wants, that the Biden administration's expressed policy, the same Biden administration that is placing sanctions on settler violence engagers, right? The non-existent settler violence, the Jewish settler violence people, right? They want an end game that involves the assertion of control of Gaza by the same Palestinian Authority, right? The same Palestinian army that they've trained, that the Palestinian army itself, you can see here in this video, is training to carry out October 7th massacre, but tenfold the effect with American weapons. Here, look at this video, right? So here's the U.S. trained force that they want to take over Gaza, that's training to massacre thousands of Jews, right? They want that to take over Gaza, and these people, these terrorists, want to have a unity government with Hamas, which of course is what the Egyptian plan is. And the United States is very angry at Prime Minister Netanyahu because he says that he's not going to allow Hamas stand to be replaced by Fatah stand, right? That's not what we want. But that's where the United States is going. So the United States is using the settler violence in order to demonize Israel, in order to set up this idea that there's something basically evil and damaged with Israeli control over Judea and Samaria, at the same time that they're taking the Palestinian Authority, which engages as a matter of course in terrorist violence against Israel, in Judea and Samaria, and supports Hamas in Gaza, and seeks a unity government with Hamas in the aftermath of this war. The United States wants a Palestinian state led by these people who will be working with Hamas, in conjunction with Hamas. They want a Palestinian state in Gaza, in Judea and Samaria, right? And they're using the settler violence the settler violence slander, the blood libel, as a means to humiliate Israel and to force Israel to maintain faith with this two-state paradigm, which is an existential threat to the very existence of Israel. Because if we saw what the Hamas regime did to southern Israel, which has a border of about 60 kilometers with Israel from north to south, imagine what will happen if you have a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria where you have over 350 kilometers of border with Israel, and it's led by people just like the people in Gaza, but with more powerful weapons and Western support and American backing. What would they do? What would they do not only to the settlers, to the 500,000 Israelis who live in Judea and Samaria, like myself, for instance, and my children and my family, but, all of the Israeli communities next to Judea and Samaria. You have the Gilboa region that you've already seen that they're trying to tunnel into from Jenin, and that they're attacking with rockets from Jenin in northern Samaria. You're talking about Kfar Saba, you're talking about Ra'anana. You're talking about major Israeli population centers, stone throw from Netanya, 25 kilometers distance from Gaza to Ofakim, 25 kilometers distant between Ayalon Highway in Tel Aviv and Judea and Tulkar. So you're talking about crazy threat against Israel, and this is what the United States is promoting and demanding that Israel accept. So that's what the settler violence thing is about. It's a setup. It's a setup to enable the formation of a Palestinian state, to force the formation of a Palestinian state on the backs, on the graves of our victims and our soldiers. And we're going to get into what's happening on the ground in Gaza as a result of American constraints on Israeli operations in our next In Focus. But here, just think about it. The same people who are targeting the Christians in Judea and Samaria and Gaza, the same are the people who are targeting the Christians all over the Western world. And rather than stand up to these people and protect Christianity and Christian worship, whether in Bethlehem or in Seattle, you have the leaders of the West who are demonizing the Jews, who are the first victims, we're the Saturday people, right? Thinking that you can feed the crocodile Israel, and pushing for the annihilation of Israel with this two-state thing that will just see Israel's demise in this war, and then its further demise in a future war that the United States is already setting up with its post-war agenda of a Palestinian unity government, as we see in the Egyptian offer, that will include Fatah and Hamas, and it will include the establishment of a Palestinian terror state, not only the one in Gaza, which we already saw what it can do, but an even more powerful one in Judea and Samaria, and what it's going to be able to do. So that's what's happening now. That's the American policy in Christmas 2023. And if we want to be in a very different position, we must be in a very different position in Christmas of 2024. We have to oppose this with everything we have. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Merry Christmas to you. Enjoy your family. Enjoy this holiday. And to all of you Jews who are watching me, we have to understand that it was in many ways a miracle that we were given the opportunity to even be in this fight. And with or without support from all of these people outside, we have to stand with each other and we have to win this war. We have no choice. So looks like we're going into a major battle, unfortunately, with the United States over what's happening here. But it's a battle that we have no choice but to enter into. We have no choice but to protect ourselves and stand up for ourselves. So those are my thoughts today, and I'll talk to you guys later this week. Take care.